Well, Telstra just announced that they're cutting 2,800 jobs by the end of this year in the name of productivity. Is that what we are talking about when talking about productivity?
Well, it shouldn't have been a surprise, I think, that the Labor's own budget forecast a significant increase in unemployment. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I was yesterday in Brisbane talking to a group of small business owners that were saying, but because of the restrictive industrial relations laws in particular, they're finding it so hard to keep their heads above water. These small businesses don't have their own legal department. They don't have their own human resources department. They don't have a compliance team.
But this is the
they
problem,
have to do it all
Jane?
themselves.
I mean, Telstra wasn't talking about IR, they were talking about AI. And with AI really impacting all of our lives in many aspects, and we talk about continued productivity, I mean, does it mean more job losses?
Well, productivity actually means the opportunity for more and better paying and better jobs, not fewer jobs. They weren't entirely talking about AI at Telstra. This was really a shift of their business model towards those areas that are growing and are walking away from some outdated areas that are now becoming putting on cost pressures. And there are pressures, there's no doubt, from all of the shareholders. And let's not forget that the majority of Australians via their superannuation funds have shares in Telstra. There is an expectation that they will be a profitable Australian company.
I imagine Angus Taylor's going to talk about this a bit today, and if he doesn't, he'll get questions about it. Your nuclear plan. Is the CSIRO correct today?
You're talking about the an updated Gen Cost report.
That's right.
Which I will put my hand on my heart and say it did come out this morning, and I've been on an aeroplane and I haven't read the Gen Cost report. But what I would say about it is that it is one particular model with a set of assumptions and a set of inputs. It's not a costing of the coalition's nuclear policy.
No, but their assumptions
and what I can say is that, well, I don't know what their assumptions are, but I know that they're not the coalition's policy. So I think we will announce our policy in due time, I promise you that. But what we've seen around the world is that when nuclear energy is included in the mix as part of a balanced mix, it brings costs down. And Ontario is the best example. This is a coal mining area. They now have 60% nuclear in their grid supporting renewables, and they have half the electricity bills that we have in Australia. Australians are paying higher electricity bills than a huge number of countries around the world that have already invested in nuclear. We're not saying a pure nuclear energy system in Australia. It's part of an all-of-the-above approach that will include wind, it will include solar, it will include gas as that transition fuel to the future, and then it will include nuclear as part of a base load solution to bring energy costs down and ensure that our energy grid is reliable and affordable. Whereas Labor's policy of 82% renewables by 2030 not only is not going to be achieved, but it requires an incredible investment in transmission lines, 28,000 kilometres right around. That's the equivalent of going twice around Australia with those transmission lines. So there is a very clear choice between a coalition policy that will be announced very soon and this ideological belligerence that won't even see Labor lift the moratorium on nuclear energy to include it as part of our thinking. There were 20 countries that signed the pledge at COP28 to triple the amount of nuclear energy in the world. And in fact, Australia walked away from that. G20 countries, we're the only G20 country that doesn't already have nuclear or is it on a path to nuclear. It does seem strange that the country with the greatest resources of uranium isn't even considering this as an option to improve its energy security.
Yeah, we don't have an industry though, so we'd have to start from scratch. And it's not quite clear what the choice is at the next election, but we take your promise that we are going to get those details.
Every country has started.
Yeah,
every country started from scratch at some stage.
Yeah, sure, but they've had a bit of a run-up, which makes it more expensive and more difficult to do.
We're not inventing nuclear. We're not inventing nuclear energy.
But you're inventing an industry, to be fair, in Australia. which doesn't exist.
It's an industry that thrives overseas, and we have all the resources and the brains here to do it.
Yeah. Okay. One final question. The gas strategy from this government was announced last week, and this has been discussed in Perth. I was at a conference yesterday talking to a lot of the big players there. They've welcomed this strategy. It sets out, the Albanese government said gas is going to play a critical role to 2050 and beyond. So it's clear in that strategy that they believe in it, and they said it's free of ideology. That is, there's West Coast, East Coast issues here, but how is it, and I ask you this because you're from Victoria, that the Albanese government has this, beyond 2050 strategy for gas, but in the Victorian government constitution, they ban new gas exploration?
Yeah, that's a very good question indeed. And you'd wonder why, particularly when you've got, wall-to-wall mainland states that have Labor governments, why Anthony Albanese hasn't been able to convince premiers right around the country to adopt his position on whether it be gas or whether it be other energy policy. The coalition agrees with the Labor Party's gas strategy, but that document really just sets out principles. It doesn't set out projects. We were looking in the budget for a reflection of that gas strategy, which came out only days before, and it didn't really seem to be there. I get a sense that this gas strategy is finding itself a little friendless in Anthony Albanese's cabinet, and indeed maybe perhaps his party room too.
You might be right. In WA, the coalition's hit back against the hydrogen subsidies or tax breaks eventually when they do come into effect, or people like Twiggy Forrest can produce green hydrogen. WA wasn't really liking your opposition to that. So where are you at with that?
The best thing that we could do for a hydrogen industry is more gas into the system. That's what the hydrogen industry needs, not tax credits. There's some very wealthy people behind the companies that are investing in hydrogen right now. They're doing okay. But it would be terrific if we made a sustainable and broader industry by lowering the cost of gas and putting more gas into the system.
Good to see you, Jane. We'll see you soon.
You too, Laura.